Here's my approach to unwrapping UVs on an organic asset, and in this example, I'll be going over this bust. A couple rules for just approaching something like this. What I want to do is try and isolate the face on its own UDIM. So if you look at this bold line here, that's where all of my shells have been cut. So I'm isolating the face, the ears, the internal areas of the face, like the eye bags, nostrils, and mouth bag. And then when I go on to the back of the head here, I'm just cutting it right down the middle and also isolating the neck area, the shoulders, and chest and back. This bust also has a bottom, so I've cut that out, and I've just made those UVs rather small on the tile here because we won't really be seeing that. With that being said, the tools that I tend to use for unfolding are pretty straightforward. I start with a planar map. I use the 3D cut and sew tool to isolate these areas that I just went over, and then I unfold them and optimize them. I also make sure that all of my shells, for anything that's like symmetrical, I try to snap it right in the middle. So I set up my grid in a specific way to be able to do that. And I also measure my UV shells to just see how much resolution I have on each shell. So this is what the end goal is. I'm going to start from scratch here by just deleting all these shells. So edit, delete, select it again, and I'm going to go create camera based. I have my UV editor open. I'm just coming into UV editor, and to open up this toolbox, I'm going to tools, show UV toolkit. And most of the tools I'm using are going to be in here and in this UV drop-down window here. I'm just going to go ahead and attach this so we can take a look at it when I get around to using the cut and sew tool. All right, so now I want to isolate those areas that I was talking about. So I'm going to start by cutting out the interior, and I'm going to turn on symmetry. Okay, so I went on to symmetry here, and I selected topology, and it says select a mesh edge for symmetry, and I'm just going to select this one. Okay, so now when I go into the 3D cut and sew tool, I'm just trying to cut on like the inside of that eyelid. So when I do paint on this, it's going to be relatively clean. So when I double click, it's just going to cut that edge loop for me. And I'm just going to work my way around, cutting out the inside shapes here. So maybe I'll go a little bit higher on the nostril. Okay, inside of the mouth. I think the interior of the ear canal will be okay, but I'm just going to go ahead and cut that as well. So now I have those pieces cut out. And if I look at my layout here, we can see all of our cuts so far. Next thing I want to do is cut out the face. So I'm going to just start on this edge loop here. And you can see when I double click, it stops. It's just when it hits these intersections where it doesn't have a clean edge flow, it's going to automatically stop the cut. So I'm going to double click again to kind of proceed with cutting the rest of that area out. And then I'll go ahead and move on to the forehead area. I tried to hide this seam where a hairline would be as much as I can, so I could potentially go up an edge loop if I want to, depending on our character here. But this should be okay for a first pass. Okay, once I have that selected now, I want to isolate this ear. So I'm going to go ahead and same thing, just double click. And I'm using my topology to kind of help me make these decisions on where I'm going to make these cuts. So I want the ear to kind of stop around this edge loop here. Okay, so I just control and double click to undo that cut so I can redo it. The benefit of using this 3D cut and sew tool is that it'll just stop cutting whenever it detects where you've already cut your UVs. So I'm able to kind of isolate that piece a lot easier. All right, so now that I have this, I'm going to work my way through the rest of the lower part of the body here. So for the neck area, I'm just going to cut it right down the middle. Okay, probably a bit too much there. Let me just undo that for a second. I do want to cut this base out first, so I'm going to double click on that. And now when I finish this cut, it'll stop right there. So now I don't have to have a unnecessary seam in that piece. Okay, so now I'm just going to cut the back of the head. And same idea, just double clicking, trying to be aware of where I'm laying these cuts. I'm trying to make sure that I sort of place them in areas that can be hidden either with occlusion or just some hair down the road, clothing. I want to, even though like we can paint out most of this stuff, I just want to try and make an effort to place these in a area that will help with hiding any kind of artifact that could potentially show up on a UV seam. Okay, so I'm just making my way around now. I've got most of this cut up. I'm just going to do the back now. Okay, so that should kind of isolate most of this for me. I think I've got everything I need. Let's also just do one right down the middle on the head here. All right, so that should be all cut up. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is just check this out by unfolding everything. So in my UV editor, I'm going to select all these UVs. Let's just do this one shell at a time. It seems like it's thinking a little bit. So unfold. And I'm just right-clicking in here to go into my UV mode. You can also control and right-click and say go to shell, and you can select it that way as well. Once I have that selected, I'm just holding down Shift and right-click and going to unfold and unfold. And that's just going to run the unfold for me. I'm going to disable symmetry right now because as you can see, it's selecting the both left and right sides. So back up to the top here, click on this drop down and say off. So now I should be able to select and manipulate these without them interfering with the other side. All right, and right now my goal is to just unfold these so I can see what these shells look like because my initial pass was just a planar-based projection. Okay, so just running through these shells. And running the unfold. And it is a little messy right now. I'm just having my shells sort of live on top of each other. But I will be arranging them in a moment and kind of going over that process next. Okay, so I think now it should be okay to kind of run it on the remaining pieces. And there we go. Everything is unfolded. And to just get a better idea of how these shells look, I'm going to select all of them, just go into my tools, my window, layout, option box. And for the most part, I leave this on default. The only thing I'm really changing is coming down into this layout settings, changing my texture map size to 4K, using a padding unit of pixels and setting up a padding distance of 5 pixels for both the shell and the tile. And for right now, I'm going to let it automatically distribute these shells for me between 3 tiles going horizontal and 3 tiles going vertical, just so that I can kind of get an idea of how much I have in terms of resolution and things like that. So I'm going to hit apply, and it's going to just go ahead and just distribute all my shells, and I can take a look at them and see what I've got here. So the first thing I want to start with is just the front of the face. I'm going to select this shell. I'm going to come over to transform and just move it by 1 UDIM. The next thing I want to do is straighten out this shell. So I'm going to select this center edge. And it's just a little bit easier for me to see it in the 3D viewport, so that's why I selected it in here. Okay, so once this edge is selected and I can see it clearly in the UV layout, shift right click and say straighten shell. And that's just going to straighten out the shell for me. Once I have this, I'm just going to go ahead and unfold it one more time so I can fix any kind of overlapping that I might have had on the eyes and the mouth. And that's just going to give me a nice straightened out layout. Before it was a little turned and it might have been a slight movement, but it's good to just kind of have this straight so that when I hold down X and use my middle mouse button, I can snap it right to the middle of my grid here. So the way I set this up was I went into my view grid option box, and I've set my length and width units to 11 so that when I get all the way to the right here, it stops at the 10 UDIM. And this is just like a universal kind of limit. A lot of renderers will let you have up to 10 UDIMs horizontally, and then they don't really have a limitation vertically. So I just go 10 by 10. And usually this is a pretty good setup for most personal projects. And my grid lines is set to every 0.5, which is going to put that little spot in the middle for me. And my subdivisions are set to 2. I did color these so that it's a little bit easier for me to see the borders. So a big problem that can come up is if you've got any kind of crossing onto the other UDIM shells, that's going to cause some issues for us. So we want to just make sure that we can clearly see if we have any sort of overlap on the borders of our UDIMs. And since I have a little bit, I'm just going to go ahead and just scale it in a bit. If you want, you can run the layout again. So modify layout or Control L. And since I only have this one shell selected, it's only going to do it on this one shell. The reason why I ran it is so that it would automatically place that 5-pixel border for me. So I don't have to worry about eyeballing it. It's just done with that tool. I'm just going to move this back over to like an empty area so I can work on it without any interference. Okay, so it's still a little off in terms of being on the center here. So what I want to do is just go back to this shell, select everything, and I'm going to hold down X and snap it to the middle. Okay, just make sure everything is looking good on the borders. Once again, just checking to make sure I've got no overlap. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Okay, so that is set up now, and now I'm going to go ahead and arrange the rest of these pieces. So before I do that, I want to make a note of how much resolution I have on this shell. So if I come all the way down here to the arrange and layout, we have a measure button we can click. And when we click it, it's going to tell us how much resolution we have on a shell here. So if I'm using a 4K map, I've got almost 4K resolution on this entire shell. So in situations where maybe we're getting really close to an asset, let's say like I have to get maybe an extreme close-up on these eyes, if I select this area and click recalculate, it'll tell me how much resolution I have on just what I've got selected. So I've got about 800 pixels here on just the eyes. So if I needed to have like an extreme close-up in this area, I would probably need to have at least 4K or 2K in this area to have it hold up and look like it's got no pixelation and it's got some nice clean textures that I can paint there. So to do this, I would have to just come in here and cut this even smaller. So maybe like selecting another edge loop in this area like so and cutting out a shell. Okay, this is like a very specific case where you may need to do something like this, but you would just kind of come in here, select these edges and trim it out so that you could bump up your map resolution in that area. So I'm just going to attempt to select something that will look right. All right, just as a quick example, we would just kind of cut something like this out so that we would have more resolution in these sort of hero or close-up areas. But that's going to make more painting need to happen. So I'm just deselecting these stray edge loops here. Okay, so now I have just like this eye area selected. And if I go ahead and cut this out and recalculate, okay, I've got about 1K. But if I run Control L to lay this out so that it takes up this entire UDIM, and I hit recalculate, now I have 4K in just this resolution here. And now I know like this should, for the most part, hold up to an extreme close-up situation. So if you need all this sort of resolution, you can cut this up, or you can also make this an 8K map. That's also a potential solution for things like that. But I just wanted to quickly show you how I use that measure tool to judge how much resolution I have on a shell. So with this said, let's say this is what I'm happy with. I want to make sure that all of my other shells match this size. So to do that, I will come up to my texel density. I want to go ahead and type in my map size. So I put this at 4096. And since I sort of have this hero shell ready to go, I will select it and click on Get. And once I have that, I'll select all of my other shells here. And then I'm going to control right click and say to shell and click on the set button. Okay, so now everything is scaled to be in the same proportion as the face. All right, so I should be able to arrange these shells now and get everything kind of lined up so that they will work better for me. So I'm going to select this, go to the move tool, and just kind of start putting them into the right orientation. And I want to make sure I got nothing in any sort of negative UDIM here. So I'm going to start at 1001 and work my way from here. All right, so we got the front of the face here. Let's go ahead and find out where these neck parts are. Select those faces in the viewport. Shift right click in here, or I'm sorry, control right click in here and say to UV shell. So now I have these two parts, and I want to just orient them the right way. And to kind of get a better visual on how this should be laid out, I'm going to apply a checker pattern to this. So to apply that UV pattern, I'm just making a blank Lambert material with a UVW. I click on the color swatch here to plug in the file. And I'm just going to go ahead and navigate over and find my checker pattern. This stuff is pretty easy to find. You can just do a quick search on the internet and locate it that way. Just type in like UV pattern. I believe polycount has a good selection that you can get. Okay, so once that's assigned, I'm just going to select my geometry. Oops, let me move my hypershade over here. Okay, select my geometry, click on the Lambert material, right click and say assign material to viewport selection. And now if I hit 6 on the keyboard, I can see that checker pattern. If I click on my Place 2D texture node, I can increase my tiling. Okay, so just turn it up to 3. And from here, I'll go ahead and keep laying out some of these UVs here. All right, so if I come back over to these two shells that I was working on, what I want to do is just make sure that these numbers are legible in the right direction. So that side is 9, oriented in the right way, and so is this side. So we should be good there. Now I can just select these shells and hold down X and just point snap them into the middle. Okay, so this is the left side, so I'm just going to also make sure that it is laid out based on left and right side on the UDIMs as well. So that can go there. This one can come over here. Okay, and we're just going to start to place them into our UDIM tiles here. Same thing with the top of the head. Just going to go ahead and start placing all these. And we're also going to check our orientation, make sure that stuff is going in the right direction. So if I select the shell and start rotating it, it needs to be oriented like this to kind of follow the previous direction. Okay, so I'm just going to spin it around so that makes a bit more sense. Okay, and then I'll snap it. Okay, same idea here. Let me just move this around so it's a bit easier to see. And I'm just checking to make sure that those are going in the right direction. All right, so we're just going to continue on here and just kind of position all that stuff. With this particular piece, since we're not really going to see it, I can kind of just shrink this down. I don't need to make sure it has the same resolution as all the other shells, and I can just kind of hide it in the corner of one of these tiles and kind of not have to worry about it anymore. All right, and now I'm just going to go ahead and lay out the rest of these. Okay, so we got the back here. Okay, so this one is wrapping a bit differently because of the way that I have unfolded and cut this shell. If I want this area to match up with the back, I would have to add an additional cut to it. So for this, I think I'll be okay. I'm just going to leave it, but it's not a bad idea to maybe trim it one more time and rotate it around if you really need all that stuff to kind of line up. The reason why I'm trying to line all this up is if I put a tileable pattern on here that has a specific direction to it, it'll all just fall into place. But for something organic like this, it's not super imperative. We could have like a poor map that will probably be okay tiling on here, or we can use a triplanar projection to kind of fix any sort of seam issues or directional issues that could come up. It's just a good practice to try and line all these up so that they are going to make the texturing process a little bit easier. Okay, so once again, just sort of arranging these so that they will lay out cleanly. All right, so I skipped ahead a bit and I just arranged all of my shells so that they're inside of their UDIMs. I have a left and right side for most of these pieces, and I've taken all the internal pieces and placed them in the center of the grid by just selecting them, holding down X, and snapping them. So all of these are right now snapped to the middle point. So just selecting that shell, holding down X, and snapping them, and they're all in place. And I've checked all of the orientation just to make sure that for the most part, things are running cleanly. It's a little different on this neck part here. So I'm just going to quickly fix that by going back into the symmetry mode, using topology, selecting that edge, and I want to just add an additional line, maybe right around here to turn that. So go to the 3D cut and sew tool. I'm going to double click on this edge right here. Okay, make sure it cut it on both sides. So now when I select this, let me go ahead and disable this by turning this off. I can rotate it so that it fixes the flow. Okay, so now that these are positioned a bit better, once again, I can scale this bottom piece because we don't really see it. Now we've got it, for the most part, laid out, but the issue that we're running into now is that they're not like perfectly symmetrical. Like this one's a little bit higher. Some of the stuff is like a bit turned compared to the opposite side. And this may come into play if we're trying to like paint half the model and flip it over and mirror it and have everything line up. If they're off like this, it's not going to quite work. So to fix that, I'm going to select my geometry, go to Edit, Delete by Type History, and make sure I don't have caps lock on. Okay, so Tools, Symmetrize, and I just need to select the center line here once I get this red line to show up. And now I get this sort of reticle thing. And whatever is blue is going to get cloned over to the opposite side. So as soon as I start using this brush tool, it's going to copy everything from the left side where those blue points are and put it over to the right side. So now I can make sure everything is symmetrical from left to right. Okay. And you can use the B tool to make your brush size larger. Okay, it's lagging a little bit, but it is copying everything over. All right, so that side's done. Let's make our way over to the other parts now. Okay, so that's mirrored over, and we can just do that exact same thing for the rest of it. So once again, select it, Tools, Symmetrize. It's going to ask you to select the center edge again, and I think we can just choose that piece. And whatever's blue is going to get copied over. And you can see that it's mirroring it across where that line is. So if that happens to you, you can just select that and just use the Move tool to put it back in its proper spot here. So just change that to 1. And now you can see that both sides are mirrored. Just want to do that for the rest of these pieces here. So once again, I'm going to select this edge just to see where that is. Make sure that's the middle. Okay, that is the middle. So Tools, Symmetrize, select that, and mirror it over. So once again, it's kind of pushing that shell across this middle line. So let me push that back to the proper UDIM. Okay, and now everything is just nice and symmetrical. Will make it a lot easier if I ever have to mirror something. So one more time, I'm just going to do it to this last shell here and finish that part of it up. Sometimes if you get an error where it says like it's not the symmetrical center, just find a shell that you know is the middle point of your object and go ahead and copy it from there. Okay, I'm going to make my brush size a little bit smaller and do the ear, nostrils, and all that stuff too. Okay. So in this particular shell, you can see that the center line kind of got pushed off. So I'm going to start here and fix this. So grab that shell. Actually, I'll grab all those pieces and just start moving it over by 1 UDIM until it lines up. This center line is the next thing that I'll need to kind of quickly choose. So select all these guys, go to the UV shell, and then just deselect. So I can just pick the ones that are broken and move them over. And now that's in the middle here. There's a little bit of overlap on this one, so I'm just going to relax these center pieces here. So unfold. Okay. And just move all the other ones back. So push this one to its UDIM, and then these. And there we go. Now we've got everything symmetrical and laid out for our paint package.